Welcome everyone to Greene County Historical Society's History Chats. I'm here, Don Van Gilder, as host today along with Chuck Offenberger. Chuck Offenberger is current board member of the Historical Society. And Chuck, am I right, this is the 7th year?
I believe it is, 7 years. Jerry Roberts and I co-hosted this. Actually, as I think about that, Don, Alan Robinson jumped in once, one day as a co-host. A couple people have done that over the years. But basically it was Jerry and I for 6 years, and then he passed earlier this year. So we were grateful when your wife, Jean Van Gilder, nominated you to be on as a co-host without your knowledge.
I do everything that Jean tells me. I say yes, dear. That's the secret of a good marriage.
It's been fun, and we're looking forward to more of these. So lead us on.
And today is our 4th of our history chats in 2 days, and this is our last of the history chats. I don't know what to say. We saved the best to last, but we got a good crowd for this. And so we're going to talk about something that I think a lot of us here have experienced here in Greene County, but Mike and Diane are going to bring us back in time to various towns that had theaters in them. What has progressed through the years on that, and then we're going to end up with an emphasis on a true gem, which is the Sierra Theater here in Jefferson. So I don't know who's going to start off first. Diane is the researcher extraordinaire for the Historical Society, and I think maybe she's got maybe something prepared to start us off with a little taste of theater in county.
Sure, okay. Well, actually, I was going through my notes and prepping for this. And so I got back on the computer and I found some new exciting information.
All right.
That I'd like to share. Some earlier history on the first moving picture in Greene County. And that was 1902. It was on a device called the Edison Projecting Kinetoscope. And it was at what would have been the head opera house at that time. And this is before there were actually any other motion pictures, but this is the way they showed them on this projector.
And that would have been where?
It was called the head opera house, which is today's Sierra Community.
Oh, okay.
Same building, yep.
Okay.
And by 1908, that became a permanent fixture at that opera house. Every Tuesday night, they would show a moving picture on this kinetoscope. You might see a vaudevillian on this screen, or you might see a boxing match, some animals, just different kinds of things like that. And one thing, when I ran into Mickey today, I found something about the first Chautauqua in Jefferson also featured a speaker that used that device, and he would show movie motion pictures all afternoon. That was 1905. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell them about what you found right before we left as far as the number of theaters back during that time, just in Greene County alone.
Oh, well, no, I was just talking about how at one time around the square and off the square there could be as many as 3 to 4 different places showing movies. And one of them, which really interests me, was called the Picture Palace, and that's where the junkyard is, where my dad's business was. And that was 1912, and that was there for a year, and then that theater became the gem, and that was until 1914. Before this, that space had the very first opera house in Greene County. That was in 1882, and it was called the Gallagher Opera House. It had seats for 300 people, it had stage and scenery.
So this is the same location we're talking about?
Yes, same location.
Where the cafe is today?
Yes.
Well, was it the same building, or was it a...
No, I don't
Sounds
think
like
so.
it must have been a bigger building.
Yeah, I think it was a bigger building. Right. So, yeah.
Hey, we should establish some background here. Tell us about your personal backgrounds and how long, how deeply you were rooted in Greene County.
Oh, okay. Well, I was born here almost 70 years ago. And I'm proud of it. So I went to school here, graduated in 1970. We were born, Mike and I married, and came back to Greene County, and have been here since '82.
You were in Durham.
I was in Durham.
Okay. Mike, is this hometown for you?
Yes.
Okay, I was not aware. And are you, I mean, the Durlams, part of the bedrock here, I think. They go way back though, right?
We do, yes, that's right.
And how about the people?
We still have over a century farm. The farm was purchased in 1913. So that's when.
What part of the county?
It's in Bristol Township.
Okay.
Both families have been here quite a long time, although Diane's family has been here much longer than that.
Yeah, my mother's side of the family, pioneers.
And what was that name?
The original name was Anderson.
Okay.
I was thinking Wiggins.
Yes, there was the Wiggins and all that.
Okay. Okay, and you mentioned about your dad's business, where the junkyard was, and that was
He started that in 1947.
in '47, and it was a butcher shop.
That's right.
Sorry. All right. Sorry about that.
But it was a butcher shop, and I remember also
No, it's just you.
small grocery. Is that right?
That's right, yep. Meat market.
Meat
Locker.
market and grocery. Okay.
That's right.
Similar to what we're going to go full circle
Yeah,
with the
that's right.
movies
That's right.
coming to town now. So, all right. As far as other movie theaters in the county, I do remember going to a movie in Peyton at that time. And did all the towns have theaters?
Go ahead, you've got the notes there. That's fine. I'll just jump in.
We're talking about Peyton.
Yeah, Peyton High.
Yeah, the first theater there was called the White Star, and that was in 1913.
Wow.
Yeah, and then it became the Ideal in 1916. And then the other information I found that in the 1940s it was just called the Peyton Theater.
Okay.
We also had an opera house there that was going in 1925.
So what would be the difference between an opera house and the movie theater?
Good question. Movie theaters were started through opera houses.
Okay.
Every community in Diane's research had an opera house in it, and even Farland, Iowa, at one time, had what it considered an opera house. And it was actually an Oddfellows Hall, but it was an opera house. Grand Junction, Rippey, Peyton, Sheridan, and I think you found one in Dana as well. Dana, Iowa had an opera house.
1897.
I'm not here in Cooper.
Diane's still researching that, Jack. She'll research that. All of these opera houses, though, provided all forms, as Diane mentioned, of community entertainment, from lectures, debates.
So basically, they had a stage.
They had a stage, every one of them, every one of the opera houses or Oddfellow halls or whatever. And all of them then converted into films. And that was back, as Diane said, back in the early 1900s, 1901, 1902, 1903. And then they just continued on, and then they got maybe more than one opera house in the community. They had an actual, what was known as a theater, movie theater came in too. But the opera houses were still in existence. As you know, the one in Jefferson is still here and it's still open. It's, the head opera house has become so many different movie theaters over the years, and it's still running today. And that's something we can talk about because it's kind of interesting, the history of it. But let's continue on to the other little movie theaters, not only Peyton, but there's Sheridan.
Right, Sheridan. It had an opera house, as Mike said, and that one opened up in 1894. Wow, that's really, their first big movie theater downtown was called the Joy. It was on the south side of their main street. we actually found a picture for that theater. And we seated something like 200 people.
Oh my
Wow.
It
goodness.
was really very nice looking theater. The Joy-O was sold and then it became the Princess Theater, and that was 1918. The next one we know was the Sheridan Theater, and that was in the 30s. And then the Rio was in the 1950s. So, I'll show you the wall.
Yeah, we have, this is really neat. This is right out of the Sheridan Theater, and it was donated to the Historical Society by Joyce and Shorty Clark.
Oh,
You're gonna see something.
Oh, I was looking for you.
Look at this. This is the original clock.
Wow, fancy.
Oh my goodness.
We don't know if the
We
Sheridan.
bought the building and that was hanging in it.
Yes, that's a story.
Electrochrome.
Yeah.
Telechrome.
Telephone.
And you figured what year was it as far as?
Mike, show it over this way.
Sure. It's kind of interesting because it
A
says
little lower, a little lower. There you
electron.
go.
So I'm thinking electricity came in, this could go all the way back to the late 30s, 1930s, by all means. It's a wonderful gift to the Historical Society, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, what a treat to have this, though. It's kind of one of a kind. Of all the theaters that were in Greene County, this still remains.
And how far back did that item go, do you think?
Well, I'm thinking it had to be back to the late 1930s when electricity was all over. The communities had electricity before rural electrification came in, and that would have been 37, 38.
Well,
We talked about that.
My folks moved here in 1945, and in order to get electricity, they'd had electricity in Polk County, but in order to get electricity for the REC to come in and put the lines in, they would do that if my dad and his neighbor saw down this huge tree, and so they were. My dad would tell the story of both of them, and they'd be on one side of the old buck saw, where you had ones, and one guy would pull and push and pull and push, and they got about half through the big cottonwood tree, and my dad's neighbor said, "Pete, do you think this is worth it for electricity?" Because once you've had it, you just can't go back, and so they were spoiled by that. So that was 1945.
Okay.
So I think the rural electric companies, RECs, well, actually it was the REA when it first came in, Rural Electric Association. So you're probably right in
Late
the
30s.
late
Yeah.
30s. Now the courthouse was built in 1917, and it was electrified.
Yeah, remember that.
How about, do I recall, I think I've heard you talk about before the theater in Grand Junction, and I can't remember why I thought that was special, except it was really neat looking. But it sounds like these things were they overbuilt? 200 seats in Sheridan, I mean, would they fill that?
I think they would fill that all the time. Remember, the one in Jefferson here had, the head opera house had 800 seats in it at one time.
Oh my
And also the Howard Theater that you remember going to as a girl at one time had 800 seats in it. So for a town this size in Jefferson, up to maybe at that time 2,000, 3,000 people or whatever. Later on 4,000, 5,000 people. It was important to have a location somewhere in your community where you could gather large numbers of people. And like I said, when they started out, they weren't all movies because movies didn't start here until, like Diane said, 1902, 1903. It was so important to have a gathering place for all these lectures, debates, everything. Even the head opera house was a schoolhouse for a year. The Jefferson School burnt down in 1906 or 1908, and all the students for a year went to school at the opera house.
Wow. Well, I mean, as you think back on the historical context of that, is there wasn't a lot of other entertainment. I mean, so it was really a gathering place.
Oh, for all types of things. And you have to remember the railroad system was extremely important back in the turn of the century, and it went through every small town. And just look to the east of us, Grand Junction, north-south, east-west. So Grand Junction was a major stopping place for people getting off a train for a night or two or whatever. So that's another reason the opera houses and entertainment venues in Grand Junction were so big. They had the people coming and going, plus they had the population.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was the Grand Junction
Well,
Theater?
Diane's got great notes on that.
Well, the first one was called the Eagle. after that. And online, there's a wonderful picture of that theater. I don't have it with me, but, so that was 1914 when that started. And that was downtown on the main street of Grand Junction. And after that then, the next theater was called the Rex. And then the Campbell and the Carpenter. And then finally they showed movies in their American Legion Hall.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty interesting. Another point there, before the Eagle got going, back in 1892, their first opera house was built. I guess we kind of talked about that a little bit. And then it burned down, and they rebuilt it, and it was there until 1945. So we also had that in addition to the Eagle.
How about Scranton?
Okay, they had an opera house as early as 1911. Their first theater was called the Pastime, and found a picture of that in the museum. And it was uptown and then Main Street, and it was next to a drugstore. That's all you could get from the picture, but you couldn't really find out too much more about it. It was just there for a couple years, and then it became a Amuzu theater.
Amuzu?
Yeah, A-M-U-Z-U.
Wait a minute. Think about that.
That's what, go ahead and add to that.
How do you say it? Amuzu.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, boy.
That's a great name.
Yes. So that was there for a few years. We thought it lasted till 1925. And then the Rialto was their next big theater there, and that too was downtown Main Street. And finally the Rex, which we thought was probably north of town.
It was a block north of Main Street, where Main Street ended. The next block, it was right on the corner. And of course, it's long gone, as every one of these theaters are, except for the one here in Jefferson. But that's where the location was.
One more, Mr. Rippey. Rippey's was called the Masonic Opera House in 1905, that was going. And I found information that they actually had a movie theater there. It was called the Star Theater. There was an ad for it in 1919. And Dana too had an opera house going back to 1897.
Dana. No Cooper, though, as you said.
Well, I have an answer for that for Cooper, and that is, we didn't need no opera house. We didn't need any theater house, because drama was a daily thing. We lived it every day. Still do.
Good answer, good answer.
So I can remember probably in Peyton, going to the theater there in maybe the late 60s. And so about what time did the demise of all of these county theaters? About what era? I mean, I know I went there in the late 60s, and I think Grand Junctions was still operating at that time. But
And I can answer that. Most of them lasted through the 1950s, but what came in that took its away? TV. Everybody decided to stay home because you could watch everything on that little bitty small box instead of going to the big screen. It was the only things that really became prominent at that time were there was a new type of theater called a drive-in theater.
okay.
And you know there's 3 left in Iowa. One's opening up this coming weekend over to Newton. It's been closed during the pandemic and all the storms that hit it, the ratio that went through it. And there's 3 drive-ins still left. The closest one we had was over in Carroll, Iowa. There was one, I think, in
There was one in Perry.
Of course, Fort Dodge, do you remember one?
Yes.
Okay. They were very popular in the 50s, and they stayed all through the 1960s. And then late 1960s, the drive-ins closed up. But at one time in Iowa alone, in 1931, there were over 3,000 movie theaters.
Oh my goodness.
Whoa.
Just in the state of Iowa. Every town, over 400 or 500 people had a movie theater. As Diane's explained to you, look at the population of the little towns. Even Farland, Iowa, where I think its population in one day had the old, Oddfellows Music Theater Hall. and they showed movies up there, and they only had, like I said, 400-some people. So it was amazing when you think
Well,
about
and
it.
that was a way to get news also, because they would have newsreels play
Oh, yeah.
ahead of
What about one we have not mentioned as far as a little settlement? Is it a days? Was it developed enough for a theater or hall?
I've never found any
Okay.
information on that.
Well, it was small, obviously, but
Yeah. But you didn't have to have much of a population, like I said, because entertainment was so important and a gathering, as you just mentioned, Don, to get everybody together, like at the town hall. As we go through and do the research, it's amazing some of the things that you find out that were in these opera houses or movie theaters. And vaudeville especially, vaudeville lasted until 1941, beginning of World War II. Small towns were still taking vaudeville acts. And of course, original vaudevillians were everybody from W.C. Fields, Groucho Marx, and the Marx Brothers, Harold Lloyd, Charlie Chaplin. There was a vaudeville route that came out of Chicago back at the turn of the century and the teens. And it would come down through New York and do the whole eastern half of the United States. Then it'd come to Chicago and it was called the Continental Review. And it would come out through the Midwest, and then after it was done in the Midwest, it'd hook up with something else in Denver, Colorado, and Denver would go all the way up to the West Coast, Los Angeles. But the vaudevillians that came through were just unbelievable, because once again, they had the transportation of the train.
Are there any notable vaudevillians that were here locally?
You know what, we still, one of the best stories, and I'm sure you remember this, and it was shared by Andy in the Jefferson Herald, was when the Three Stooges were in Greene County. And,
Really?
yeah, 1933, and they were eating lunch at Scranton Island. That's where they were spotted. They were over at the Scranton Cafe, and Dan Haley, who was over there, had mentioned that to his son, and that was carried down through the history that he was in the cafe. He went every day for lunch, and all of a sudden, these three guys walk in and sit down on the stools on the counter, and he looks over, and it's the Three Stooges. And, yeah, wait a minute. What do you think about that? You can't believe it. But the research I found, it could be very well authenticated, because they were on a nationwide vaudeville tour. They had done one movie by that time out on the East Coast. They were traveling they were at Cleveland, Chicago. They went through all the towns in northern Iowa. In fact, Waterloo, Iowa was a major town in Iowa for vaudeville. That's in all my research. I found out of all the communities, Waterloo, Iowa was one of the most important, even bigger than Des Moines, which is amazing. But they'd trickle down. They'd go straight over west to Fort Dodge. In Fort Dodge, they'd come down. They'd do Grand Junction before they'd do Jefferson. And once again, that's because of the transportation and the trains. So they do Grand Junction, then they go to Jefferson, and shoot over to Carroll, then on to Denison, and then keep going to Sioux City, Council Bluffs.
one of the great theatrical stories in Greene County history is Eva Leonard, who was the Grand Junction native, and she was kind of the queen of vaudeville in New York and Broadway for a time, in the 20s and 30s. Am I thinking right?
That's right.
So, I don't know this. Did she ever come back and play in Greene County?
Diane, do you remember, have we found? I have never seen anything either.
I've never heard that, but I just am curious. When I think about other stars coming in and playing in Grand
Yeah,
Junction.
you would think she would, and she was a Ziegfeld, Florence
Ziegfeld
Ziegfeld girl.
College, yeah.
Oh,
The
Ziegfeld
Venus,
College.
the Venus of Iowa. they call
Yeah,
it.
yeah, very
Wow.
prominent, very well-known individual, very well-known individual lady. But I'm sure there's tons and tons and tons, and Diane and I are constantly doing research. And now that you can go online with all the newspapers in Greene County, I can't tell you what a treat that is.
Yeah.
All of you should try that. The information is just phenomenal, isn't it? Just the ads alone, when we look up for theater productions or vaudevillians or whatever, that was their only form of communication. There was no radio, there was no TV. Everything was in the paper. Everything. Flyers, of course, billboard-sized posters were on the outside of the theaters, outside of the vaudeville houses and things like that.
Haven't you shared some of those posters?
Oh,
I think I
all
remember
the
you
time.
doing a program where you had those movie posters.
And I could have
They're
brought
just
them out
art.
here, but not everybody's seen them. And well, now I can tell you what I've done. Since the theater is so historic here, and as I've mentioned, we're one of the 10 oldest theaters in the United States still in operation. In fact, I think we're number 7, the 7th oldest in North America That includes Canada.
Wow.
The oldest theater in the world is located in Washington, Iowa. That's the oldest theater in the world. It's called the State Theater, and they have shown a movie every night since 1897.
Wow.
They have not missed a night, and that's in our home state. And here we have original Opera House, which is now the Sierra Theater, on that top 7, 8, 10 list in North America. But the one in Washington is the oldest in the world, and it's been recognized as such.
We should have that on the marquee.
That's right. Anyhow, what I've been doing is I've been putting posters, and we've decorated the basement of the theater, and I have posters as early as 1917 for films that were actually shown at the theater. And I've got them displayed downstairs, and I have everything from Greta Garbo, I have everything from Jean Harlow to Clark Gable to James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, Audrey Hepburn. I've displayed all of these, and it's just a fun little thing. If you get the chance, walk down the basement. It's wide open in the Sierra Theater. We've got them displayed in the back room. It's a wonderful, wonderful history. Yeah. Yeah. Should we talk about the?
How did you get
In Jefferson, now I don't remember this, but the building that Dr. Heisterkamp is in had originally been.
Oh, Diane's got that. I'll let her speak to that. Listen to this. This is a real treat.
That was the Lincoln Theater. That was 1914 when that got started.
This is the southeast corner of the
Right,
square.
right up the street, right up the road here.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, the corner of Lincoln Way and then Chestnut.
Right.
Right on the corner. And so the manager of that had bought all the seats out of the gym theater, which was over there, we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, the shop was. And he got all those seats, closed that down, the gym, and then took them over and started the Lincoln Theater. And that ran for about 6 years, till 1920. It was really popular and competition for the Majestic, which Michael talked about, which was at the Head Opera House.
Okay, so that's one theater that we had. Another one that I remember, and I think we talked about this earlier, was the Howard Theater, and that was located where the People's Bank is now, I believe.
No, I think it was actually to the west of the Junkyard Cafe, and it was torn down.
Yeah, it would be west of the junkyard where People's
Yes.
Bank is.
So we tore it down, because as a kid, I can remember Big and Shaw Furniture being in that building.
Okay.
And upstairs, there were law offices. Gene Nelson had his law office up there.
And the unique part of the Howard Theater was the movies that it showed.
So you don't think that the Howard Theater was where the Junkyard Cafe is now? I thought the Howard Cathedral was more near the alley there, near that alley. I thought the Howard Cathedral was more closer to
Well, I
the
think
alley.
it
Did you
was
think
torn
so?
down.
It was torn down.
I
Where,
don't know.
where the Junkyard Cafe is where Durham Market and Locker was. You're right.
And then
Yes, I remember that being there. Yeah.
And the Howard was just west of that.
Because that's a big lot there. As Diane said, that was torn down.
And then right beside the Howard was the Ford dealership that burned. The Ford dealership, whole Ford dealership that burned in there.
Yes.
So let's go to the history of today's Sierra Club Theater. The Head Opera House is how it starts, right? And again, I think you said this earlier, when was that built?
1884.
Wow. And then how does it develop after that?
Well, it had a number of, like I said, everything from teaching school for a year there, when the school burned down, to lectures, community events, vaudeville. It went on and on and on. Remember, above it was the Masonic Lodge. That theater was built with the intention that the Masons would be up above, and they would build that theater so that it would serve not only membership that Head was involved in, which was he was a Mason, also to the east of it is the Oddfellows Hall, which he was an Oddfellow as well. He was gonna make sure there was an opera house, but above it, the Masons would have their own meeting room. If you've never seen the top of the Sierra Theater, give me a call and we'll take you up there. It's just as big up above as it is down below in the theater.
It's a special space.
It's a special
The
space.
few times I've been up there and seen it, my mind runs wild at what happened up there.
Oh, it's unbelievable, the size of it. It's just huge and it goes on. It's a full length of the building. Just as big up above as it is down below. But anyhow, vaudeville and all of this extra entertainment and educational and social meetings and groupings, you know, it had everybody from Iowa's famous Cherry Sisters, as you've all heard about, you know, these 5 sirens from Cedar Rapids who, you know, came out and they considered one of the worst acts in the history of entertainment. You know, they sent them on to New York, but they played every town in Iowa almost, from Grand Junction to Scranton to Jefferson to all the counties, you know, and it was a big to-do. And there was something going on at the head opera house almost every night of the year. They had something going on there. The biggest play production was Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1915. There was more money brought in at the head opera house for Uncle Tom's Cabin than any other theatrical production in the history of the opera house. Guess how much money was brought in? And remember what a nickel bought back then. $220. Now what does $220 buy you today? How many nickels are in $220? It was amazing, and that's held the record as far as
Number of people?
yeah,
Wow.
for a nickel.
Well, how many nickels are there at $220? This is math beyond me.
I don't have that.
Somebody figured that
Somebody
out.
have to figure that out right away.
How much?
4,400.
Is that what it was?
4,400 people.
Isn't that amazing? And that opera house alone, that's how many. And
How long did it run?
generally 5 days.
Wow.
But there would be 2 performances a day sometimes. That's like when they played Gone with the Wind here in 1939. Gone with the Wind played for just 3 days to start with. But there was 3 shows a day. First one was at noon, next one was 4, next one was 8. Remember, Gone with the Wind's almost 4 hours long. I remember one of the old timers told me that, he says, I remember watching it as a boy, but he said I had to stand clear around the corner in line just to get in. He said it was that well attended and that populated. He says, any showing you went to, no matter if you went to the early one, the middle of the afternoon, or the night one, you stood in line completely around the block in Jefferson just to get in the movie theater. And he says, if you were lucky, you got to get in and get a seat. Otherwise, he says, the doors were shut and you had to come back to the next one.
So, Diane, do you know, can you tick off the various names of the theater here over the years?
Of the Sierra Theater.
The Sierra?
Yeah.
Sure. In 1916, it was the Majestic.
So we're starting off, though, it's the head opera house.
Head
The Head
Opera
Opera House, which did show movies at that time, motion pictures were
Right.
being shown in it. And then new management, and it was the Majestic for 10 years, and then it became the Strand. And that was until 1931, and they did a whole renovation, and then called it the Iowa Theater,
And then it was that
until it became the Sierra Theater.
So was that when the Fridleys,
Ridley's.
with Iowa Theater, then that was big with the
So it was
Fridleys?
73,
1973, it became the Sierra Theater.
Okay.
I get,
long time.
I mean, I get the Strand, I get the Iowa, the
Majestic.
Head Opera House, the Majestic, all good movie houses. Why are we the Sierra Theater?
I don't know why that name was chosen. I've often wondered that myself. Why did they call it the Sierra? Because most theaters back then were the Rex, you know, the Warners, the Paramount, the Orpheum, you know, the Rio, the State, Strand, whatever. But I'm amazed at that also, Chuck. I have no idea.
I'll buy a 4-H beef burger for the best explanation of why it's the Sierra Theater. And of course, this is all preposterous, so the best explanation of why it's the Sierra Theater, I owe you for a 4-H beef burger, so go to work.
Let Diane share with you some of the other theaters in Jefferson.
All right, so we talked about the Picture Palace and the Gym. So on the east side of the square, there's a theater that started in 1908 called the Crystal.
East side of the square,
East side of
okay.
the square, we think it's where Duff Stadium is.
Okay.
Oh,
And it was the Crystal until about 1913, and they changed the name to the Busy Hour.
Busy hour.
There you
There's
go.
pictures.
This is one of my favorite photos. I'll pass this around. Look at this.
Oh,
Diane
my.
was able to find a photo of this from what year?
This would be 1912. Well,
Wow.
1913. That's
And
when
look
it
at the,
became
look at how
Busy.
big it was. And look at, here's the other photo of it with a popcorn machine in front.
Wow, show that to Carson there. Mike.
Yeah, we'll pass this around. I'll give you that one. It's a wonderful photograph.
there were, I think, 3 different popcorn machines. I think we talked about that, around the square in Jefferson. That's good to see that.
Wow.
Take them to figure out what the popcorn machine inside.
What took so long?
That wasn't done in the 30s or the 40s. Food, no, food in the theater was not until the 50s.
What's the reason?
I don't know, but you could smoke in any movie theater, and all during presentation, ever since the beginning, where you chew tobacco, there was actually spittoons all up and down the movie theater rows, where you could spit, or if you smoke, you just put it out on the floor. That's why a lot of theaters burnt down,
Okay.
because they allowed smoking up until the late 70s, wasn't it, I
I think
think?
so.
Yeah.
Was this why they had ushers? I remember they used to have ushers.
Had ushers, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was ushers in every movie theater. In fact, we were doing research on Scranton Theater. I remember talking to Lou Ann Waldron. She says, well, my mother-in-law was an usher. Well, I was able to contact her. She says, yeah, I was an usher there in 1947, 49, and I had to wear a uniform.
Wow. I was just going to ask if they wore the old
Yeah,
uniform.
had to wear the uniforms in
Wow.
all the theaters. Yeah, there was ushers all over. Some of the large theaters literally had 35, 40 ushers during the show. Some of the large theaters could seat as many as 5,000 people.
How many theaters altogether were there?
Oh, I'll give you that. Diane's got that right
It
there.
must have been 7.
Yeah.
There was one called the Unique. So the Unique was only in business for 6 months. It was in 1912. I think they just had too much competition. The owner of the Busy Hour bought all their equipment. Busy Hour.
Maybe they did it, they
Well, let's see if we're talking about the Busy Hour.
Okay.
So the Busy Hour went from
Please listen.
1913 until 1918.
That's a nice paper.
At that time, the Lincoln Theater was still going till 1920. Then it closes, and then you just have what is today's theater going until 1937, and the state opens up, which is in the building where the Howard was. So trying to figure out exactly where it was.
It's got it back out there. I knew he would.
We found a great tagline for one of the theaters here back in the teens, and I'll have Diane read it to you. We can find it here in our notes. It was, all right, let's see, where's it at? Oh, it was the Unique Theater. Got it?
It's the most,
Listen to this tagline they put on an ad for the Unique Theater. It was,
the neatest and most sanitary theater.
there's one other tagline that when you bought admission, it would give you, it's probably on this page right here. I'll show you. It would be, no, it'd be on the first page. Jefferson.
I know they call it the Strand, the Temple of Performing Arts.
The other theater was called the Crystal Theater, and in 1908, one of the ads for the movies on the Crystal Theater said, the Crystal Theater is where you can get $1 worth of pleasure for only a dime. That was on the ad. Isn't that amazing? $1 worth of pleasure for only a dime.
What a great line. What we talked about the nickels for, was that Uncle Tom's Cabin?
Yes.
So throughout those early years of movie theaters, was a nickel a common admission price?
Anywhere from a nickel to 35 cents. because I've seen ads for the Opera House from the early 1900s. It was a certain production or a certain entertainment venue. It was the top of the line was 35 cents. Now, some places it was balconies were always more expensive. You have to remember that because balconies and the old taglines were balconies were for lovers. Because you could go upstairs and you could kind of be away from everybody. Remember, balconies were always smaller. The majority of seats were down below. You could go up there and...
Sierra had a balcony.
Sierra did have a balcony.
I remember that.
Yes, it did.
Oh, for lovers.
When did that
When
end,
did
the
it
Sierra?
go
Do you know
away?
what the balcony did?
That would have been in the 70s too when it was made over.
Wow.
So, Mike, you're on the board, the local board for the Sierra Theater. Tell us a little bit about how that transition came from, as I mentioned earlier, the Fridley family owning that to the local organization, theater board, and tell us about how that transitioned and to where you are today.
Still in existence, thank goodness, knock on wood, because it costs a lot of money to show films nowadays. Remember, the studios still take up to 85% of your tickets. So the only way we stay in business is because of people like you who make donations and enjoy eating our popcorn.
We should have had some here.
I didn't
should
really.
have had some popcorn there. We've been forced to keep going because I guess it was 10 years ago, Fridley was ready to let go all of his theaters because you had to change over to the modern technology when it comes to shooting movies. You know, it's digitized now. It's no longer the film reels, 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter. That's another thing in the basement of the theater. We still have the old 35 millimeter reel, and we have old projectors from the turn of the century. And anyhow, it was started, the committee of Jefferson people, Greene County. I was asked to serve on that board, and we went out and raised funds up to $180,000, and that's what it took to convert over the screen plus the projector. Everything's digital, as I said now. Now you show movies from just a simple little disc. That's all. That's all we get in the mail. Every week it comes up UPS or it comes up FedEx, and it's just a simple little disc where you insert it in and run a film. Anyhow, we had a wonderful campaign, and we converted over, and loyal support has kept us going. Now, mind you, it's been a real struggle during COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a real struggle. We've maintained and we stayed open. There was only a short time that we had to close the doors during COVID when it was just out of control completely. But we've masked up. We still do today. If people come, we say we prefer you wear a mask. But we're getting back into the swing of things over the last 6 months, 7 months. And Hollywood, remember, during that time period, didn't even produce any movies. There were no movies around for 2 years. The movies they did produce, they put on TV, instantly go to TV. Or you could just scan them, screen them, zoom them in, whatever. But there's nothing like a full screen to see, larger in life, to go to a movie and enjoy it. And that's why I always say when Diane and I go out and visit with people, everybody in this audience has a favorite film. There's no doubt about that. And it's always fun to hear what it is because that's something that sets in your mind. Be it a child, be it a teenager, be it an adult, everybody has a favorite movie to go to.
Okay, what's yours?
Casablanca.
Yeah.
Diane?
Gone with the Wind.
Wow. Amazing.
Of course, we like Wizard of Oz as well. Wizard of Oz is a wonderful film too. So
Happened
many
one
great
night.
Oh, Clark Gable, yeah, there's so many great movies. Yeah, Chris.
What kind of control do you have over what movies you show?
We have contact with all the studios, from Disney to Sony to Warner Brothers to whatever, and we have an agent here locally who books films for us. And what we do is we follow the trades on what's being made, what's being put out in the next 6 months, 9 months, a year. And what we do is we'll speak to our local booking agents and try to get this, see what the chances are, see what the cost is too. Because remember, anymore, we can't afford to run a movie 3 weeks because our third week, people just do not show up. The first 2 weeks they come. Like when we just showed Tom Hanks's film, Top Gun, tremendous response from people in Greene County.
I was right up to work there.
Tremendous.
I was up there every night.
Every night we
I
had.
went, I liked it.
Well, thank you for going.
And I'm not a fan of Top Gun, but I did like it.
See, we've had a lot of people say that. They didn't really care to go see Top Gun, but they wanted to go to a movie and it was great. You know what else so many people, and we are getting this, we're getting Elvis.
Why you getting it?
Yeah, we are. We've got it booked for a week from this coming week, but it takes so long to work with these studios. And I'll tell you what's the hardest studio to work with, and you hate to think about this, because it started out great, is Disney. Disney is one of the hardest studios to work with because it's automatic. The largest percentage we have to pay out, we pay to Disney. We don't pay it to Sony, we don't pay to Paramount, we don't pay to RKO, whatever. Sony is number 2, but Disney is the number 1 as far as charging us rates. So we are out there, we try to book something, we call them and say, is this available? Remember when a theater books a film, you're only getting one of so many prints made. In this case, discs, which are a lot cheaper than the old prints. Chris?
Who's going to the movie? I mean, can you give me a demo? You try to keep track of any demographics?
You know, in Jefferson right now in Greene County, we have at least 50 dedicated people that'll go to every film no matter what it is.
Okay.
I don't care what it is.
I think it's the popcorn.
You know what, we've heard that. There's some nights we'll sell more popcorn than we'll ever sell tickets.
I gotta tell you, during the pandemic, there was only like an average of 10 people. And there was one night I was the only one there. And before that, the movie before that, Jerry came to get some popcorn and he said, kick her out. Is she the only one there? And they said, no, there's one other person. They said, we would never kick her out. But I gotta tell you, this is funny. When we were dating, we went to see the movie Love Story. We were the only ones, and we got kicked out. But then the next time we went, and we were the only ones, but they said we could stay and watch it.
Well, you can stay and watch a film here. We'll never kick anybody out. We have one person. It's set. Everything's timed out. 7 o'clock. Sometimes when we have large crowds, it's 7:05 or 7:10. But that film is always going to show here. Like I say, remember what I just said about the State Theater in Washington, Iowa? Every night, even if they haven't had anybody, since 1897, they have cranked the wheel and shown a movie.
Well, during COVID, they might not have had people in there, but they showed.
They might not have people, but they showed a movie every night.
I wondered about that.
Yeah.
The one of the things that came with the change in technology, I think, was with the new projection system and all that. You can take news events and turn on the big screen, right? And I remember, I think I've gone to a couple of presidential inaugurals at the Sierra. That was great. I mean, the quality was, better than I had on TV at home. And it was,
Yeah, you all have entire digital quality. It's phenomenal. The sound, size, and everything. Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Ted McGee, why no more cartoons?
You know what? I'm going to insist that when we do classics, I'm going to get some original cartoons because we can't get original Warner Brothers, MGM, you can get Tom and Jerry, you can get Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig. And what I'm doing right now is doing some research on the ones that are in eminent domain. And
public domain.
Public domain.
Public,
Yeah, public domain. And what we're going to do is bring those in along with a couple of Three Stooges shorts. And I thought about bringing in a newsreel as well, and the board has discussed that. As Don mentioned, that was very important to a community to see the latest newsreel, especially during World War II. Remember, during World War II, our most famous celebrity that came to Jefferson was Donna Reed. And she came to Jefferson, and I have the original poster that was playing at the movie theater when she was here, and I have a photo of that was shot with Donna Reed standing out front. It was called Apache Trail. And I've got the poster downstairs in the basement of that. But she was here, and she auctioned off pies and cakes and around the square, and brought 2 most important people in her life, she said. I'm coming to Jefferson. It was her mother and father.
Oh, wow.
Donna Reed wrote more wartime letters to servicemen than any other star in Hollywood during World War II. She wrote almost 3,000 letters to servicemen on the front
And
lines.
at the Donna Reed Museum at Denison, which is connected to the Donna Reed movie theater, you can see those letters.
Yeah. That's a fun place to visit too. If you ever get a chance, drive over it. Easy drive.
Mike and Diane, I think it's in, help me with the date, Margaret, on the movie we're gonna show at the
August 6th.
August 6th.
Oh, filmed locally.
Wickham's War. This will be on, is that the Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday.
Saturday afternoon
At 2 p.m.
at 2 p.m. We've arranged this. Are you conversant on Wickham's War?
Jed is going to do that.
Just one of the stars.
Yeah.
And-
Jed, speak
Well,
up
I'm
to that.
sitting next to one of the
Muriel was
people.
there too. Muriel was there.
Prop director.
Well, listen, tell us about you two.
Jed, stand up. Both of you
Muriel?
stand.
I don't know most of what to say, but it was a local movie done right here on these fairgrounds. I don't remember which building it was.
This was hell right here.
All I know it was cold.
No, I mean, it was, it was, it made it look like hell.
The idea was Satan was trying to take over this church and got stopped the preacher. But I remember the weather was not good and it was cold, and we found out how actors' lives go because you stand around and wait all day. You start at 7 o'clock in the morning, you might get done at 10 o'clock at night, you may not have done anything except wait.
What was the thrust, what year was this recorded?
79, 82?
It was released in 1980.
Okay, that's about right.
And then,
About 98.
what was the, in short form, what was the story?
The story is a guy starting a new church and the devil comes to town trying to stop him from starting his new church. And his was a conflict with all the other preachers in town. I remember I had one line and it was against another preacher. He said, well, we're going to get together, and my line was, only if we're not in the same room together.
And, do we know why that it came to Jefferson, why it landed here?
He has an Iowa connection, Russ Dalton, who's a producer-director.
Yeah, he lives in Des Moines,
He lived in Des Moines.
but I don't know how he got to. Jefferson.
Wow.
Yeah. There's only about 3 or 4 of us that are still alive.
How many local people appeared in it, do you know?
I just got the list from Rawfield Day, and it's long.
Yeah.
Probably 50 people.
Wow.
The only, maybe not speaking parts, but it was crowd sings and so on.
I was in it.
Were you?
Yeah, I was in a crowd scene.
I was in class.
And Margaret, again, when are we airing this?
August 6th at 2 p.m. at the Sierra Theater.
And it's free, isn't it?
It's free.
And then when
Concessions
you
will
get done with
cost.
that, you can come to the concert right again at 6
Yeah,
o'clock.
but concessions will, you need to, and everybody should buy concessions because we want to support the movie theater for having that.
Are you kidding at what we've heard about the popcorn just today? There's probably going to be a mad dash right after this is over.
But it's interesting talking about Wickham's War because that wasn't the only movie that was filmed in Greene County. We had Mike actually had a relationship with Wendell Jarvis, which was the head of the Iowa Film.
Film office, you're right.
Film. And so we were able to, Wendell was able to get us Twister, and maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, Michael Jarvis, who was the location manager for Steven Spielberg, he did it for years and years and years. Through Wendell Jarvis came to Iowa to scout locations for a movie about tornadoes. And Wendell Jarvis was calling all the counties in central Iowa, so we called up here and I said, sure, come on up. So he came up, I met with him. He says, I've got this location manager coming from Hollywood. He wants to come out to Iowa and find a place to make a movie about a tornado. I said, sure, send him to Greene County. So he was up here for 6 weeks in Greene County. And he would come to the courthouse every day. Don and I were working up there at that time. And he'd say, well, I drove to this place and this place, but I want to go here. Please drive me around. So I would take him out 3 or 4 days a week from the auditor's office, and we'd drive Greene County, and he'd look at places, he'd shoot photographs by the hundreds, if not thousands, and send them back to Hollywood to Steven Spielberg. And so we kept going back, and this is how I'll finish this up. We kept going to Scranton and to Rippey and Peyton. He really enjoyed Peyton, Iowa. He constantly wanted to go back up to Peyton, Iowa. But all of a sudden he got a call from the director of the film, and Spielberg says, book it. So he stopped and he says, we're going to shoot this scene at Rippey, Iowa.
Yep.
So we went down there on the highway, the Rippey Highway,
West, E57.
E57, and for 2 days, all of Hollywood came to Greene County. It was unbelievable. I remember everybody, all of a sudden it was just like a circus overnight. There was lights, cameras, and action. There was hundreds of people. There was makeup people. There were stars.
Wow.
There was,
If you remember the movie, the scene that was shot was where they are driving the pickup through the house. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And through the house, and they made a mock-up of the house on E57 west of Ripley. And then, how about lunch that you had with the 2 stars?
oh yeah, they said, well, come on eat. So I took everybody to the auditor's office and we went to the Ripley School. And here sits Helen Hunt, Bill Paxton, and now 3 out of the 4 people received Academy Awards. And they were all sitting in there with us, and we were all eating lunch together. And of course they had all the food from Hollywood, you know, they had their own little chefs around there and things like that. And all of us were sitting down in the Ripley School with all these people eating dinner, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful occasion. Now,
What year is this?
This would have been 1990, this would be 1993, 95, somewhere around there.
Somewhere along there.
Yeah. But anyhow, and in that scene, you can see it. When you see the movie Twister, when they go through, you can see Ripley, Iowa at the end of the road. And that's our claim to fame. And let me wrap this up because Michael Burmeister stays in touch with me every year. He sends me Christmas cards, and it's such a wonderful friendship that I've built. After that, they went on to do another movie with Steven Spielberg, and it was called Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, wow.
Tom Hanks. And there's a great scene in there that when they finally find him, Tom Hanks says, "Are you Michael Francis Ryan?" And he says, "Yes, sir, I am. I'm Michael Francis Ryan from Peyton, Iowa."
Oh, wow.
And I'll never forget that, and that's all because he kept, Michael Burmeister wanted to keep going to Peyton, Iowa, and as location manager, which is a big job for somebody like Spielberg, he had enough to say, Francis Michael Ryan, Peyton, Iowa, that's where he's from.
Wow.
Anyhow, that's a wonderful movie too, but that's another time. But anyhow.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Diane Piepel. Fantastic. All 4 of our discussions as you proved how rich this county is in stories and characters. I mean, 2 of them sitting right here. And I mean, it's really been something to hear these stories. So we thank everybody for coming out. We'll be doing this, hopefully doing it again next year. We really thank you, Don. Great working with you this first year.
Appreciate it.
We'll do it again next year. And I think we have Holly Roberts coming on board as our trio of co-hosts next year. Every year that goes by, we get a little older, we need more help. So,
need more ideas?
Yeah, but thank you, and we appreciate you tuning in for the Greene County Historical Society programs that we post on the YouTube channel. And that happens because of Carson Roberts, who's standing right here, the Director of Digital History. So thank you.